Zalika's heart pounded like the frantic rhythm of a war drum as she darted through the narrow village paths, her bare feet barely making a sound against the packed earth. The flickering glow of torches from her family's hut still burned behind her, a reminder of the fate she was defying. Her wedding garments, finely embroidered with gold threads, clung to her damp skin, now a burden rather than a symbol of status. She ripped off the heavy veil as she ran, letting it fall into the dust behind her like a discarded shackle. She had heard the tales. No woman defied the will of the elders, and certainly not the demands of Chief Jahi, a man feared by all. He was known for his ruthless rule, his many wives mere possessions under his power. The moment Zalika's father had announced the marriage, she had felt the cold chains of captivity tighten around her soul. She had pleaded, she had cried, but tradition was deaf to a woman's sorrow. Now, the only thing louder than her own breath was the sound of pursuit behind her. Men shouting, dogs barking, the village was awake. They had discovered her absence. She pushed forward, deeper into the jungle, where the thick vines and towering trees swallowed her in darkness. Branches clawed at her skin, roots threatened to trip her, but she did not stop. She could not. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chase seemed to die behind her. The voices grew faint, the torches distant flickers. Had they given up? Or had she gone too far, to a place where even her pursuers dared not tread? She slowed her steps, her chest heaving, her skin slick with sweat. The night air was thick, humid, carrying strange scents, damp earth, distant flowers, something musky and unfamiliar. The jungle was alive, whispering, watching. The realization struck her all at once: she was alone. She had escaped the village, escaped her cruel fate. But in doing so, she had thrown herself into the arms of the unknown. The jungle was alive in ways Zalika had never imagined. It was not the quiet emptiness she had hoped for, nor the peaceful refuge she had foolishly pictured in her desperation to escape. It breathed, it whispered, it watched. The thick canopy above swallowed the moonlight, leaving only narrow beams to illuminate the winding paths of gnarled roots and damp earth. Her body trembled, both from exhaustion and the creeping awareness that she had stepped into a world that did not belong to her. Every rustle in the leaves, every distant growl sent a fresh wave of fear through her. This was not the gentle wilderness outside the village where children played at the edge of the river. This was something deeper, something untouched by men. She moved cautiously, her steps slow and deliberate, but the jungle was not kind. Thorny vines snagged at her wrists, her fine wedding robes already tattered from her escape, and now hanging in shreds from her body. She peeled them off, reducing herself to the simple wrap beneath, one that allowed her to move more freely. Then came the whispers. At first, she thought it was just the wind filtering through the dense trees, but the sound had a weight to it, something deeper than a mere breeze. The hush of syllables, too soft to understand, too steady to be dismissed as coincidence. Zalika spun around, scanning the darkness, her breath tight in her chest. Nothing. Yet the feeling of being watched grew stronger. A pair of glowing eyes flickered in the distance, amber and unblinking. A predator. Zalika froze, her body rigid as she fought the instinct to run. Running would make her prey. She had seen hunters return with trophies of those foolish enough to flee: deer, antelope, even men who wandered too far into cursed lands. She took a step backward, then another, and the eyes did not move. They only watched. She forced herself forward, deeper into the unknown, until the earth beneath her feet changed. The jungle floor, once damp with fallen leaves and soft soil, turned to smooth stone. She looked down, her breath catching as she saw the intricate carvings beneath her feet, patterns swirling in ways that did not seem random. Even in the darkness, she could tell she had stumbled upon something ancient. A shrine. The structure was barely visible through the thick vines and twisted roots that had begun reclaiming it. Columns, half-toppled, loomed in the shadows, covered in strange symbols Zalika did not recognize. There was a stillness here, different from the rest of the jungle. No rustling leaves, no buzzing insects, just silence, as though even the creatures of the night knew better than to disturb this place. She swallowed hard, stepping cautiously toward the center of the ruin. The air was heavier here, thick with something she could not name. The hairs on her arms rose as a chill crawled up her spine. She was not alone. A slow exhale, something not her own, drifted through the air behind her. Zalika barely had time to turn before strong hands seized her. She thrashed, her instincts screaming for her to fight, but they were too many. Rough fingers tightened around her wrists, pulling them behind her back as another hand pressed firmly against her mouth, muffling her terrified cries. Her heart pounded in her chest as she struggled, her bare feet scraping against the stone ruins, but it was useless. The warriors, if that's what they were, moved with precision, their strength undeniable. Through the flickering torchlight, she caught glimpses of them. Their bodies, bare except for animal hides draped over their shoulders, were marked with strange, painted symbols that pulsed beneath the fire's glow. Their eyes, dark and unwavering, regarded her not with cruelty, but with something more unsettling, reverence. They spoke in hushed tones, their words heavy with a language she barely recognized, a dialect older than the village tongues. One word, however, came again and again, whispered like a sacred chant. Mwajili. The chosen one. Zalika's stomach twisted. This was no ordinary capture. These were not mere hunters or bandits seeking a runaway bride for ransom. There was something deeper at play, something ancient and unknown. The leader, a towering figure with deep scars lining his chest, stepped forward. His presence alone made the others still. He reached out, his fingers grazing the side of her face, tracing the delicate gold markings her mother had painted on her skin for the wedding that never was. His expression hardened. "She carries the blessing," he murmured, this time in a language she could understand. A murmur of agreement rippled through the warriors. The man gave a sharp nod, and before Zalika could react, a length of rope tightened around her wrists. She gasped as they pulled her forward, their grip firm but not cruel. Panic surged through her. Where were they taking her? What did they mean by blessing? She was forced deeper into the jungle, the path winding into the very heart of the forbidden land. The deeper they went, the stranger the air became. The warmth of the night seemed to shift, thickening into something almost tangible, like the jungle itself was watching, waiting. The torches flickered unnaturally, casting long, stretching shadows that moved like living things. The silence between the warriors unnerved her the most. No laughter, no chatter, only the rhythmic sound of footsteps and the rustling of unseen creatures in the trees. Hours passed, or maybe only moments. Time blurred. Zalika's body ached from exhaustion, her mind spiraling into dark places. Every whispered chant, every stolen glance sent a fresh wave of unease through her. And then she saw it. Beyond the tangled vines and towering trees, a great stone temple rose from the earth, its walls carved with symbols far older than her village. Fires burned along its edges, casting eerie shadows that made the figures etched into the stone seem to move. A chill ran through Zalika's spine. She was not meant to be here. And yet, she had no choice. Zalika stirred, her body aching from the long journey through the jungle. The scent of burning herbs filled her nostrils, thick and unfamiliar, as she slowly blinked herself awake. She lay on a woven mat inside a dimly lit hut, its walls made of thick, dark wood, the air heavy with the warmth of a smoldering fire. Strange symbols were carved into the beams above her, twisting patterns that seemed to shift under the flickering torchlight. She sat up with a start. The last thing she remembered was the jungle, the temple, and the warriors who had called her the chosen one. Now she was here. Wherever here was. The faint murmur of voices outside made her pulse quicken. Carefully, she moved to the entrance, peeking through the gaps in the hut's woven walls. What she saw took her breath away. It was a village like none she had ever known. Thatched roof huts surrounded a vast ceremonial ground, where fires burned in great stone basins, their flames casting eerie shadows against towering totems carved in the shape of beasts. Dark-skinned villagers moved between the structures, dressed in robes of deep crimson and gold, their faces painted in intricate patterns. And everywhere, whispers. She saw the way they glanced at her hut, their expressions a mix of awe and fear. Mothers clutched their children closer. Old men muttered incantations under their breath. Zalika shuddered. She had not escaped one prison just to land in another. A movement at the entrance made her snap back. A woman stood there, tall, regal, her hair adorned with golden beads that clicked softly as she moved. Her gaze was unreadable. "You are awake," the woman said. Zalika swallowed hard. "Where am I?" "The hidden village." "The last of its kind," the woman answered, stepping inside. "You have been brought to the Dark King." Zalika's skin prickled. "Who is he?" The woman did not answer immediately. Instead, she studied Zalika, her dark eyes searching. Then, she whispered, "The one who has waited for you." A chill ran down Zalika's spine. Before she could speak, the woman stepped aside. Two warriors entered, their faces shadowed by deep hoods. They gestured for her to follow. Her heart pounded, but she knew she had no choice. Stepping into the night, she felt every eye in the village on her as she was led past the fires, past the hushed whispers. The path sloped downward toward a vast stone structure, larger than the temple she had seen before, its entrance shrouded in darkness. A single brazier burned before it, illuminating the figure who stood waiting. He was tall, his presence commanding, his bare chest marked with ancient symbols that glowed faintly in the firelight. His face was partially obscured by a mask of obsidian, carved to resemble a beast's face, half man, half shadow. Zalika's breath caught in her throat. The Dark King. She did not know if she was a guest, a sacrifice, or something far worse. Zalika's breath came in shallow gasps as she was led toward the massive stone structure. The torches lining the path flickered in the wind, casting shadows that danced like spirits against the towering walls. Every step felt heavier than the last, her heart pounding against her ribs as she approached the figure standing before the temple's entrance. The Dark King. He stood motionless, a presence so commanding that even the warriors who had brought her here lowered their heads in quiet reverence. The flickering light of the brazier illuminated his form, a tall, broad-shouldered man with skin like polished ebony, his bare chest marked with glowing symbols that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the night. His face was partially hidden behind an intricately carved obsidian mask, a fusion of man and beast. Zalika swallowed hard, refusing to let fear consume her. The silence stretched between them before he finally spoke, his voice deep and measured. "You ran from one fate and into another." His words sent a shiver down her spine. "You will not keep me here," she said, forcing strength into her voice. "I don't belong to you." His dark eyes studied her, unreadable, piercing. "Fate says otherwise." Zalika clenched her fists. "Fate is cruel, then." A faint smile, just a flicker, touched the corners of his lips before vanishing. He turned and stepped into the temple's entrance. "Come," he commanded, as if the decision was never hers to begin with. She hesitated, but the warriors behind her shifted, making it clear there was no escape. She exhaled sharply and followed. Inside, the temple was nothing like she expected. It was not a place of worship but a palace of stone and fire, its walls etched with glowing runes that pulsed softly in the dimness. Golden bowls of incense burned along a long, ceremonial hall, filling the air with a scent both intoxicating and unfamiliar. The Dark King walked ahead of her, his steps silent despite his size. She could feel the weight of his presence, the raw power radiating from him, but it wasn't the same kind of power the cruel chief had wielded. The chief had thrived on domination, on fear. The Dark King, however, carried an aura of something else. Something she didn't understand. He stopped at a raised stone dais at the end of the hall and turned to face her. "You have entered sacred land," he said. "No one finds this place unless they are meant to." Zalika shook her head. "I was running. I didn't choose this." "You were chosen," he countered. She felt the intensity of his gaze, even through the mask. It unsettled her, made her pulse quicken in ways she didn't want to acknowledge. "I will find a way to leave," she said stubbornly. The Dark King stepped closer, his presence nearly overwhelming. "You will try," he murmured, "and the jungle will bring you back." A shudder ran through her. She wanted to deny it, to call him a liar, but something deep inside her whispered that he spoke the truth. She had escaped the fate of a forced marriage, only to land in the hands of a man who claimed she was meant to be his. And the most terrifying part? A part of her was beginning to wonder if he was right. The fire crackled low in the center of the village as the elders gathered around Zalika, their lined faces solemn in the dim light. The air was thick with the scent of burning herbs, their smoke curling toward the dark sky like spirits whispering secrets. "You must understand, child," the eldest among them rasped, his voice heavy with warning. "No one comes here by accident. And no one leaves unchanged." Zalika wrapped her arms around herself, a futile attempt to shield against the cold dread settling in her bones. "I don't believe in curses," she said, though the quiver in her voice betrayed her. A woman, her face painted in sacred white ash, leaned forward. "Belief is irrelevant. The land chooses its own fate." The other elders murmured in agreement, their eyes reflecting the flickering flames. Zalika stole a glance at the Dark King, who stood silent at the edge of the gathering, arms crossed over his broad chest, his expression unreadable. He had brought her here, but now, he simply watched. Another elder, a hunched man draped in animal furs, spoke next. There was another, long ago. A woman who refused her place. Zalika's stomach twisted. What happened to her? Silence stretched thick between them before he answered. She ran. The words sent a chill down her spine. And, she pressed. The elder's wrinkled fingers traced the earth, drawing unfamiliar symbols into the dust. The jungle swallowed her. A shiver ghosted over Zalika's skin. You mean she got lost? No, his eyes lifted to hers, dark and certain. The jungle would not let her leave. A gust of wind stirred the trees, and in the distance, a low, haunting wail echoed through the mist. It didn't sound human. Zalika's fingers clenched into the fabric of her dress. She was never seen again, the elder continued. But sometimes, at night, her voice drifts through the trees. A warning to those who think they can defy the will of this place. Zalika shook her head, refusing to accept their fear-laced words. You're just trying to scare me. The elder let out a slow, knowing breath. Child, you are already afraid. She hated that he was right. The Dark King finally spoke, his voice smooth yet heavy. The jungle does not let go of those it claims. Zalika turned to him, her frustration mounting. You act as if I have no choice. The Dark King's gaze bore into her, intense and unwavering. You have one. He stepped closer, the firelight casting deep shadows across his sharp features. You can fight the fate that brought you here and risk what lies beyond those trees, he gestured toward the dark wilderness. Or you can stay and accept what you were meant to be. Zalika's breath hitched. And what is that? His lips barely moved, but the weight of his words settled deep in her chest. Mine. A gust of wind swept through the village, sending shivers across her skin. Somewhere in the distance, the jungle sighed. The firelight flickered in the Dark King's eyes, casting shadows that made him look even more untouchable, more formidable. Zalika had spent days trying to escape, nights dreaming of the world she had left behind, but here, in this moment, she was no longer sure what she was running from. You look at me like you want something, he murmured, his voice low, knowing. Zalika straightened, lifting her chin. You mistake defiance for desire. He chuckled, a deep sound that sent heat curling through her. Do I? She hated how he unsettled her, how the air between them felt charged with something unspoken. He had done nothing to force her, yet his presence alone was enough to make her pulse race. The villagers watched them in silence, their expressions unreadable, as if they had seen this before, as if they were waiting for something inevitable. She stepped back, creating distance. You claim I have a choice. Then let me go. The Dark King's eyes darkened. And if you no longer want to leave? She swallowed hard, refusing to acknowledge the way his words made her stomach twist. She had spent her life being told what to do, who to marry, how to behave. Yet here, in this strange, forbidden place, she was something else, something more. The Dark King did not demand her submission, yet every look, every word, pulled her closer to the edge of it. "I won't belong to you," she whispered, as if saying it aloud would make it true. The Dark King stepped closer, and the fire between them flared, casting golden light over his sharp features. "You already do." Zalika's breath caught. He reached out, not to grab, not to take, but to offer. His fingers hovered just above hers, waiting. A choice. The villagers' whispers swirled around them, the weight of prophecy, of fate, thick in the air. Zalika knew she should turn away. But she didn't. Late one night, guided by whispers in the wind, Zalika followed the flickering glow of torches deep into the heart of the village. The elders stood in a circle around an ancient stone, their faces grim, their voices murmuring in a forgotten tongue. "The prophecy is unfolding," one of them finally spoke, his aged eyes locking onto hers. "You were never meant to escape your fate, child. You were meant to fulfill it." Her pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" The elder gestured to the Dark King, who stood at the edge of the circle, his expression unreadable. "He is not merely a ruler. He is a soul bound by forces beyond this world. And you, Zalika, are the key to his salvation, or his eternal damnation." The words sent a chill through her. She had suspected there was more to him, his presence, his control over the jungle, the way even the earth itself seemed to respond to him. But a curse? A prophecy? "I never asked to be a part of this," she whispered. The Dark King stepped forward, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "Neither did I." Zalika searched his face, looking past the intimidating mask of power and into the man beneath. There was something almost vulnerable there. A flicker of sorrow, of longing. She turned back to the elders. "What happens if I refuse?" A heavy silence fell. The oldest among them finally spoke. "Then the curse remains unbroken. The jungle will continue to trap lost souls. And the Dark King will never be free." She felt every gaze on her, waiting, expecting. The Dark King said nothing, only watching her with those piercing eyes. He would not beg. He would not force her hand. This choice, her choice, would decide both of their fates. The village was alive with an eerie energy, torches flickering against the ancient carvings that lined the temple walls. Drums pounded in a slow, hypnotic rhythm, their echoes carrying through the jungle like whispers of unseen spirits. Zalika stood at the center of it all, her heart hammering in time with the beats. She was dressed in ceremonial garments, flowing silks of deep crimson and gold, the colors of fate. The elders formed a circle around her, their faces unreadable, their voices murmuring prayers in a language she barely understood. At the far end of the temple steps stood the Dark King, his towering figure cloaked in shadow, his golden eyes fixed on her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. He had given her this choice, one last chance to leave before the final ritual began. Run. The word echoed in her mind, but did she want to? She had come here as a prisoner, a fugitive seeking freedom from one fate, only to stumble into another. The Dark King had captured her, yes, but he had never hurt her. His power was undeniable, his presence overwhelming. But there was something else, something deeper. A connection that neither of them could fully understand, something that made her question if escaping was what she truly wanted. "You may leave now," the high priest intoned, his voice ancient and weighty. "But once the ritual begins, your choice is sealed. You will either become his queen, or the offering that breaks the curse." Zalika's breath hitched. She glanced at the jungle beyond the temple gates, its shadows shifting, calling her back to the unknown. Could she truly go back? Back to a life where she was nothing more than a pawn to be sold? Or was she meant to stay, to embrace a destiny that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure? The Dark King stepped forward, his hand outstretched, not forceful, not demanding, but offering. "I will not chase you if you leave," he said, his deep voice a quiet storm. "But if you stay, there is no turning back." The villagers held their breath. The jungle itself seemed to still. the entire world balanced on this moment, on Zalika's decision. Her body trembled, her mind warring against her heart. She had feared him. She had hated him. But now, standing before him, she saw something else, a man bound by chains as strong as her own. A man who had never truly been free. And perhaps, just perhaps, she was meant to be the key. The drums pounded louder. The sky darkened. Zalika took a step forward. She had made her choice. The jungle never forgets. Long after that fateful night, the villagers still whispered Zalika's name beneath the moonlight. Some claimed she chose to stay, standing beside the Dark King, her presence forever woven into the fabric of the hidden village. They spoke of a queen unlike any before her, fierce, untamed, and bound to the one man even the spirits feared. Those who believed this version of the tale said Zalika ruled with a fire in her heart, transforming the hidden village into something stronger, something even the jungle itself dared not consume. The Dark King, once cursed and bound to his fate, found his match in her, a woman who had defied destiny and chosen her own path. Together, they became part of the jungle's legend, their names whispered in reverence, their shadows seen only by those who knew where to look. But others swore she had vanished, swallowed by the jungle's embrace. They told of strange shadows moving between the trees, of a soft voice carried by the wind, calling to those who dared stray too far. Some said the jungle had claimed her as its own, transforming her into something neither human nor spirit, a warning to those who tried to defy fate. Hunters who ventured too deep spoke of glowing eyes watching from the darkness. Some said they had seen a woman in the distance, standing at the edge of the trees, her hair wild, her skin illuminated by the moonlight. She never spoke, never moved, but her presence sent a shiver down the spine of any man who crossed her path. Those who saw her rarely returned the same, whispering of a beauty too haunting to be real, of a sadness in her gaze that felt like a curse. And then there were the ones who simply disappeared. Men who sought to capture wandering women, who thought the jungle was theirs to conquer, sometimes never returned. The villagers would find their abandoned weapons, their camps left untouched, but no trace of their bodies. It was as if the earth had swallowed them whole. The jungle remembers, the elders would say, shaking their heads as they stirred the fires at night. And it never forgives. Children were warned from a young age, never step beyond the sacred trees, never call out a name into the darkness, never believe you can outrun fate. The jungle had eyes, the jungle had a will of its own, and those who did not respect it would find themselves lost forever. But sometimes, on the stillest of nights, when the wind carried the scent of rain and the stars flickered like distant souls, a sound could be heard deep within the trees. A soft, ghostly whisper. Some said it was the Dark King calling for his lost queen. Others believed it was Zalika herself, reminding the world that some paths, once chosen, could never be undone. And somewhere, beyond the mist and ancient trees, the legend of Zalika lived on.